everybody. Welcome to this month's edition of The Shepherd's Voice, and I'm going to turn it over now to the host of the program, the Bishop of Trenton, Bishop David M. O'Connell. Welcome, Bishop.
Thank you, Jim. Hello, everyone. Good to be with you again today. How was your trip? You had a little bit of a vacation, didn't you?
Cheryl and I go out to the desert every winter just to kind of get away. Beautiful, beautiful. We love it out there.
Yeah, it was nice. Was the weather nice?
Oh, you can't beat Arizona in January and February.
Oh, wow.
But, there's a beautiful monastery in a little town called Tonopah. It's about 60 miles west of Phoenix. And you have to travel 6 miles of desert road to get to it. And it's Mother Angelica's order, Our Lady of Solitude Monastery there. I think there are five nuns there. They're cloistered. But we like to go out there and just kind of spend some time there, too. It's just a very peaceful.
Isn't that nice?
It is. It's lovely, lovely, lovely.
I've only been to Arizona a couple times. I've been to Phoenix and Scottsdale, Arizona.
Right.
I had a friend of mine who was on the board of trustees at Catholic University, Van Smith. He ran a big corporation in Muncie, Indiana. And he had a vacation home there.
Okay.
And one Christmas, he gave it to me. He says, "Why don't you go out for a week or two and just relax there? My wife and I are not going to be around. You go out there." Yeah. So I went out and enjoyed it. His house is right on a golf course there.
Oh, sure.
So, and then just to walk around. The one thing I noticed was amazing. Like if you went to a shopping center, spray would come down from the
to cool the air off.
To cool the air off.
Yep. Yeah, little mist machines.
But it was certainly a beautiful.
It was. We lived out there for 3 years. We first got married. We were out there for 3 years, the first 3 years of our marriage. And when our first son was born, we literally said, we got to go back home where everybody is. The three of us were sitting out there out in the desert all by ourselves. And we're really very family oriented.
Yeah,
so once the baby came, we came back east.
Beautiful. My father was a golfer, a great golfer, actually, a very fine golfer. And he participated in, he was never a professional golfer, but he certainly could have been. And he actually beat Bing Crosby in a tournament once.
Really? Wow.
And then won the opportunity to participate in what was called at that time the Beat Bing competition. And he went out to Arizona and
did he?
Played there and
plenty of golf courses out there.
Oh gosh, yes. And he loved the golf. God bless his soul.
Yeah.
He was a wonderful guy, And he, my brothers were golfers, my older brothers, and I dabbled with it when I was a seminarian. But at the time I was in the seminary, you kind of was looked down upon.
Oh, really?
You don't go golfing.
Right.
That was the time, and. But I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too. I played a lot when I was younger, much younger. I did play a lot, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, when I was teaching in the high school, I went out with a golf team there.
Okay.
They called me, assistant coach, but I was terrible. I'd send them out on the front nine, and I'd go play the back nine because I didn't want them to see how terrible their coach was.
Wonderful.
It was fun.
Wonderful. Great.
Fun. Well, we're in the season of Lent. Thanks be to God. A great time of both penance and time of grace. And we have, it's hard to believe it's March. Gosh.
I was saying that this morning. Already, where is the year going?
It just goes by so fast.
Yeah.
And here, this coming Sunday, the second Sunday of Lent. Of course, the first Sunday of Lent is always the temptation.
Right.
In the desert.
In the desert, that's right.
Second Sunday is always the transfiguration of our Lord, from temptation to glory. And so Lent moving along, and I had the chance to issue my directives. I give pretty much the same directives every year for guidance for the faithful, especially about fasting and abstinence, because people get a little confused, with the changes in the church's legislation on these things. So many years ago, people still aren't quite sure about it.
Right.
The regulations for fast and abstinence and. Days of fast during Lent really are days they ask for one full meal. It's hard to legislate exactly what that means because what may be a full meal for me is not a full meal for somebody else.
Right.
But to use your best judgment there. And abstinence, of course, is no meat. And it used to be, as you recall, and as many people continue to advocate that we should go back to this, is no meat on Fridays, but during the season of Lent, it's Ash Wednesday and Good Friday are the 2 days of strict fast and abstinence, and then abstinence during the Fridays of Lent. And it's really not that much to ask. There's so many options. I was never a big eater of fish. I never liked fish.
Right.
And my mom liked fish. She enjoyed it. My oldest brother liked fish. But my dad was not a fish eater either. So for us during Lent, it was breakfast for dinner or macaroni and cheese or pizza.
Pea soup.
Something like that.
Right.
Some kind of a soup or something like that, or grilled cheese sandwiches or things like that.
Yeah.
But during
But when we were growing up, it was every Friday until
every Friday.
Right? I remember,
that's what I mean.
Remember,
and people, it's interesting because there seems to be a push. It's not a strong push, but I hear it every once in a while. People who wish we would go back to that as a sign of penance, and people have argued both sides of it. But anyway, during the season of Lent, it's abstinence on all the Fridays of Lent, and fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. No dispensations are granted on the solemn days, on Ash Wednesday or Good Friday. This is going to be a problem next year, because next year Ash Wednesday is Valentine's Day.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So I can anticipate already, even though we say ahead of time, no dispensations or move your Valentine's Day to another day.
Right.
We're going to get hammered with that, and we're being unreasonable, and we're, all of that stuff that usually goes with it. But on those days, on Ash Wednesday, which is past, and Good Friday, which is yet to come, if you're sick or there's some provision in canon law, those who are automatically dispensed, you follow the regulations. During Lent, Fridays of Lent are days of abstinence. Now, the pastor of a parish, I want to make this clear to people because they don't seem to understand. In light of St. Patrick's Day, which I'll say,
which is coming up.
I've granted a dispensation.
You did.
From
officially.
The abstinence from meat for St. Patrick's Day, which is the third Friday of Lent, on March 17th. So people who are members of the Diocese of Trenton or physically present in the Diocese of Trenton on that day
can have their corned beef.
Or steak or whatever they want to have on that day. A pastor can give a dispensation to an individual.
Okay.
For abstinence, but only the bishop can grant it for the group or a group of people, and so that's why I issued a decree.
So a pastor couldn't tell his parish,
no,
but individually.
But if you were to go to
individual case,
I have a special event. Could I? And I've received from some pastors who have confirmations.
Right.
On Fridays of Lent. And they say, well, families are going to get together and they're coming in from all over and they want to, is it all right? Would you grant a dispensation? And I have granted the dispensation for two parishes who have asked. But I'll tell you, when I grant the dispensation, what I say is, and what I said for St. Patrick's Day, the laws of fast and abstinence church are serious obligations. Right. We really don't have that many. And so to just discount them, it's really not in keeping with the spirit of the reason behind these obligations.
Right.
And so what I say to them is, all right, if you want to have meat on this particular Friday, St. Patrick's Day, or on those days when there are confirmation parties or what have you, that's fine. But transfer the obligation to abstain from meat to another day.
Okay.
Okay, so that have it on Thursday or whatnot. Don't just do away with it or eliminate it.
Right.
Transfer it. Or do some pious work, some act of charity, extra prayer, maybe contribute to people in need, some special act of charity or pious work to keep the spirit of the obligation alive, but transfer it to another day. Don't just eliminate it. These are important things for us as Catholics to observe. We don't have these in other religions, but they certainly have this regulation in Catholic. Other religions do fast,
right?
But this Lenten regulation is present in
now. Fasting, there's an age limit that right?
Yeah, there are age limits. Those between the ages of 18 and 59. Okay, you and I are out of that.
Yeah, long out of that.
You're obliged to fast.
Right.
Only one full meal on those days. From the ages of 14 on, the abstinence obligation pertains to you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're over 14 or over,
Mm-hmm.
you're to abstain from meat on the Fridays of Lent. This obligation prohibits eating of meat. So I can't go to Ruth's Chris and have a nice big juicy steak,
Right.
or Outback and get a hamburger or any of those things. But it doesn't prohibit eggs or milk products or condiments of any kind, even if they're made from animal fat.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about meat here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the obligation. It's a serious obligation for Catholics, and failure to observe one penitential day during Lent, that's not a real serious offense. It's an offense. Okay, it's not observing the law of the Church. But if you just don't pay attention to it all, then that's a serious matter that merits your. And I think you just mentioned it in confession.
Yeah.
Tell the priest in confession, I didn't observe it, and don't go crazy about this. If you forget,
Right.
and it's possible that people do forget.
Sure.
You it's not a willful act,
Right.
so it's not sinful.
Mm-hmm. What if you realize it halfway through the hamburger?
Well, once you break the fast is broken.
Okay.
Okay, or the abstinence, it's
I remember
broken.
that happened to a buddy of mine. We were in college. We were getting raised Catholic all our lives. We were driving home. It was a Friday night. We stopped and got a hamburger. We said, "Wait a minute, it's Friday."
I know. Well, once you start, you've already broken the abstinence rule. So, but we used to do that as kids. We would see someone eating meat, and we would let them eat the meat, and then we would say, "Oh, well, today's Friday of Lent," just to get it.
Okay.
But anyway, fast and abstinence. Abstinence on Fridays of Lent. Keep that. It's a serious obligation, and try to observe it.
Right. And also, I think it still is a penitential day. And when we say don't eat meat, if you go out and have a big lobster dinner, it almost is that like you're defeating the purpose?
I'll tell you a story,
Okay.
and this is when I was a young priest.
Mm-hmm.
And I was helping out in a parish. I'm a Vincentian, so
Right.
I'm not a parish priest.
Right.
But I would help out in parishes on
Mm-hmm.
Sundays and other special days throughout the year. And I remember helping out on a Good Friday in a parish. It was a lovely parish. It was up in the Diocese of Buffalo at the time. And the pastor said, "Okay, well, we're going to go out, grab a bite to eat after the service, after the Good Friday service."
Mm-hmm.
So the Good Friday service was at 3, and it takes an hour and a half or so. And then we went out to a restaurant at 5, and he ordered lobsters for all of us. And I thought to myself, isn't this kind of not quite observing the spirit of,
Right.
of what we're doing? These big lobsters, and
Right.
I felt so guilty afterwards. And I
Yeah.
thought, Jesus, that was just the wrong thing to do. So anyway, but that's the season of Lent is really, it's a beautiful season. Really, it's a time kind of to take stock of your life, get a grip on the perspectives that you have toward being a Catholic and living your faith in this world, and recognizing that no one is perfect. We all fail. And also gives us the opportunity to think maybe more seriously about the sacrament of reconciliation, sacrament of penance, confession. There are, just as there are during the season of Advent, during the season of Lent, parishes will have penitential services, and they usually bring in priests from other parishes or other places to help out, and they encourage the faithful to come and go to confession during this penitential season. I know I help out in a number of parishes during the season of Lent and during the season of Advent too. I try to not make too much of my presence there, and just I just wear a regular black cassock and just sit in the back, hoping that people aren't going to say, "Oh, it's the bishop! The bishop is here, bishop." Just let me be a priest, and it rarely works though. They
I'm
almost
sure.
always. I was at one penance service and during Advent, and the priest was announcing, oh, Father so-and-so will be in the confessional, and Father so-and-so will be up behind the altar, and so-and-so. And the bishop will be in the back. So all of a sudden, my line lengthened.
Uh-oh.
But, yeah, so
Tough to be incognito when you're a bishop.
there's no such thing, I find, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I went out to grab a bite to eat with Monsignor Arnister last night. He was up in the area, and we were just dressed in regular casual clothes.
Right.
And as I was walking toward the table, you know, several people, hey, Bishop, hi, Bishop. You know. So I said, well, I guess I can't be incognito anywhere I go.
No longer. No longer. Right?
Probably just
comes with the territory.
It goes with the territory. That's right. But season of Lent, make sure you don't let it pass you by.
You know, one thing I went to Mass on Ash Wednesday over in Bucks County, but Cheryl was saying at where she works, her parish, which is in the Metuchen Diocese, she said every Mass and service for Ashes was packed this year.
All of my pastors are telling me that this, well, you know, of course we're kind of out of the COVID fear that kind of has been hanging over our heads for the last couple of years.
Right.
But I had Ash Wednesday at the Chancery. I did the Chancery Mass. It's very hard to get priests to help on those days because there's so many services in the parishes. And, and then I did the 12:10 Mass over at the cathedral, which I always do. And the cathedral was mobbed. Yeah. It really was. Yeah. There were more people there than I've seen at the cathedral in a long, long time for ashes. And, you know, ashes are not required.
Right.
They're a sacramental. They're not a sacrament. But they're a beautiful indication of the desire to begin penance. It's a custom that I think goes back to the liturgical observance, goes back to the 10th century. But, you know, wearing of ashes has been something that you read in the Old Testament, a sign of mourning, a sign of penance, that goes way, way back, thousands of years in religious observance. And the practice of imposing ashes on the forehead, as I said, goes back to around the 10th century, and it continues to be part of our liturgical observance. And it's a sign, really, not only to yourself, but it's a sign to others who see you that you're beginning a special time in the church's season. Even you see sometimes on television some of the
the Catholic commentators, newscasters,
and interesting.
There was a neat meme that I've seen the past few years. The day before Ash Wednesday on Tuesdays, you know, the memes you see on Facebook.
Oh yeah,
and it said Catholic women who are looking for good, holy Catholic men, tomorrow God will mark them for you.
I did see that.
Did you see that?
I did see that. They marked them out. I mentioned the dispensation for St. Patrick's Day, so I just want to.
So that's official,
again.
And that's per diocese, right?
Every diocese will make that determination. All 5 of the dioceses in New Jersey have made that determination. I brought it up at the last meeting of the bishops of New Jersey. In February 7th, we met together up in Metuchen Diocese, and boy, what a beautiful pastoral center there. In Metuchen.
It used to be it used to be a high school, St. Pius X High School, and I taught there when it was a high school. Yeah,
gorgeous.
It is
beautiful chapel, and Bishop Cecchio hosted us for the meeting. It was very good. But we brought this up, and all of us agreed. You know, given the nature of St. Patrick's Day, it's hard not to do it, although some bishops have. Like I noticed in Bishop Peprocki in Illinois, he didn't grant the dispensation. There are some who don't, and I guess they have their reasons, you know. Yeah. But my reason is, I'll grant it, but transfer it to another day, just so you don't skip out on the idea of.
So if I live in another diocese where it's not, there's no dispensation, I can come over to Trenton and have.
And you're in Trenton. It's for those.
It works that way.
It's those who are residents of the Diocese of Trenton and those who are traveling through the territory of Trenton.
Oh, I didn't know that. All right.
So, you know, somebody might come in from some other place.
Right.
I think in our region, I think Philadelphia granted the dispensation. I just saw something about that. Most do. Yeah. But, well, you just hope for the best.
Sure.
So, you know, we have some things going on during the month of March here in the diocese that are worth noting. You know, young adults we had the Diocesan Youth Conference
Yeah.
early in February. It was magnificent. We had
Mhm.
about 750 youngsters from all over
Great.
the diocese.
Great.
Really great day. It was the theme of it was connected,
Mm-hmm.
and so all of us who gave talks, I celebrated Mass and gave a homily at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Used kind of that theme of remaining connected to God, connected to faith, connected to one another.
Sure.
But it was a great day. We had it down at St. Joseph's Parish in Toms River,
Yes.
Donovan Catholic,
Mhm.
down there, and good job. Dan Waddington is our director of youth ministry here in the diocese, and he and his team and a lot of volunteers from the chancery and from around the diocese were there. I'm so grateful to them.
Mhm.
It was wonderful. But on this Saturday, tomorrow, March the 4th, for those who are listening to us on Friday afternoon, it's not too late. Young adults between the ages of 18 and 39 are invited to a day-long event, retreat really, for young adults, beginning at 10 a.m. at St. Raphael's Church. St. Raphael's Parish Church is on Broad Street, 3500 South Broad, actually, in Hamilton. And the theme for this retreat is Given, Become What You Receive. There's going to be a full day of activities sponsored by the Diocesan Youth and Young Adult Ministries. And the keynote speaker is musician and evangelist Jerry Jez Ford, who has been at diocesan events before. Wonderful speaker and very inspiring. And I think if young people are able to come, will really enjoy and profit from the day. But that's tomorrow. That's
Okay.
Saturday. And we have on the first Tuesdays of the month, I don't know whether I've ever mentioned this or we've mentioned this, we have meetings at St. Gregory the Great Parish Church Community Center over in Nottingham Way. Beautiful church over there. A peer-led support group that fosters healing and hope and prayer for women who are struggling with infertility or pregnancy loss, and other women maybe who want to share their own experiences. It's every Tuesday, 7:30, in the Bachman Room over there in the parish center. Beautiful opportunity for Catholics.
Okay. I wasn't aware of that. I wish we had known. We could promote it more.
Yeah. Well, I just became aware of it very recently.
Yeah.
And even though I'm the bishop, I mean, I'm not aware of every single thing that's going on in the
Right.
diocese, and
Right.
many of the parishes do wonderful things. I mean, they don't have to ask my permission.
Right.
And they do them, and I'm so happy that they do, because the church isn't just me; it's all of us. And
That's right.
it's great when we see the parishes taking a lot of different initiatives. On the 18th, which is a Saturday, from 9 until 3:30, at the Co-Cathedral, St. Robert Bellarmine over in Freehold, we're going to have a program for catechists, catechist formation. We do this every year, and this year it's going to be Joe Paprocki. He's been to the diocese before. He's a wonderful speaker, and he's going to talk to the catechists about formation, especially in this year of Eucharistic revival. Father Martin O'Reilly, who is the chair of our Eucharistic revival, along with Ashway Areola from the Chancery, Father O'Reilly is going to be the celebrant and homilist for the Mass that day, and talk about the Eucharistic revival. So that should be a great opportunity.
And that's open to
it's open.
catechists?
Catechists
Okay.
and people who want to know something about catechesis
Okay.
or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to the diocesan website, or you just you Google catechesis on the Eucharist, Diocese of Trenton, the information will come up.
Okay.
You can register there. But that's the 18th of March.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of days later, on the 22nd, Monsignor Sam Siriani, the rector of the Co-Cathedral and pastor of St. Robert Parish, he's going to give a kind of a talk for Eucharistic ministers. And we have Eucharistic ministers in all the parishes of the diocese on biblical images of the Eucharist. So that's a Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock, 7 to 9. and he'll have he's always does a great job. Extraordinary ministers are certainly welcome. Now on the 25th of March has got a lot of stuff going on. On the 25th of March, our vocation office, Father Jason Parzinski and his assistant vocation directors are going to sponsor kind of a retreat day, a Lenten retreat day for those who are discerning vocations to the priesthood. That's also going to be at St. Robert Bellarmine. Everything's over at St. Robert Bellarmine. It's going to be celebrated there. I think it's from 10 until 2, I believe.
Yeah.
And again, that's going to be a beautiful day, Mass and prayers and talks. Father Monsignor Michael Walsh is going to be there to speak. Father Gary Koch is going to speak. And, of course, Father Jason, the vocation director, is there. But I want to encourage anybody who's thinking about a vocation to the priesthood that you go to some of these events. It's not a commitment. You're not signing your life away.
Right.
It's to go and, find out a little bit more about the vocation and what's involved, maybe to see other young people who are thinking just like you are. So I encourage parents especially to encourage your young people because that's where we're finding sometimes the obstacle is the parents don't encourage their young to think about the priesthood. And there's a lot of things that are in the news and the abuse scandal that scares people away, unfortunately. And that's one of the casualties of this crisis that the church has been through. But there's much more to the priesthood than that.
Yeah.
Without priests, you don't have the Eucharist.
Right.
Like Pope John Paul said that, without the Eucharist, you don't have a church.
Yeah.
So encourage people to continue thinking and praying about their vocations. And March 25th, Cathedral, St. Robert's, 10 to 2 in the afternoon. Be a wonderful opportunity. So that's about all the special events that are going on. At least the ones that I know about. I mean, it's always good to consult the Monitor website or the diocesan website or social media.
Yep.
And they really do advertise a lot of things. Some of the things that I don't even know are going on.
Right.
That are going on. They're good for people.
And we too. I always encourage the parishes, even the diocese, just let us know. We're happy to promote it on the air. A lot of people listen, and people listen, especially during seasons like Lent, where they're looking for something extra to do.
Yeah, they do. And there's a nice article in the Monitor this week about family observance of Lent, making Lent a family thing. And I read the article. I recommend it to you. It's really beautifully written and kind of makes you realize, as Catholics, we are a family-oriented faith and a family-oriented religion. And rather than look at things simply as regulations or rules, maybe to look at these as opportunities to celebrate our faith and to share our faith, especially with our young people.
Right.
That's the one thing that worries me as I look to the future, maybe the young people today, in the last generation or two, really haven't had the same kind of exposure to the, let's call them the things of our faith.
Our culture. It is
the culture of our faith.
Sure.
And so trying to look at some of the aspects of our religious practice and pass them on to the young so that they become aware of it. Sometimes I remember one time talking to some girls about nuns, and I used the expression nuns. They had no idea what I was talking about.
Oh, my.
They'd never heard of the expression nuns before. And even when I described it, and I said, well, it's religious sisters. It just didn't resonate with them at all because it just hasn't been part of their experience.
That's right. How about the young people revival down there at Asbury University in Kentucky? Did you see that with the nonstop praise and worship?
Honestly, Jim, I saw references to it, but I don't really know that much about it. I saw Cardinal Dolan on his radio show. He had something about it, but I really don't know that.
They interviewed some of the young people. Of course, it's not a Catholic university, but they were just
what is it? It's
Asbury University in Kentucky, and these young people started this prayer service revival, and it didn't stop. It was going on for a couple of weeks, nonstop, 24/7. People were coming from all over, and they would interview some of the young people, and they were saying they just felt the presence of the Holy Spirit. They were just Wonderful.
But it's not Catholic.
No, it wasn't Catholic. Wish it was, but
Yeah.
it was growing. And then I understand that other universities around the country were starting to do it as well.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's
Like a movement.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like a
And
movement.
I was very impressed, especially when they would interview these young people who would talk so openly about just being there and feeling the presence of the Holy Spirit. And I didn't want to leave, and there was just so much love. And it's, so the Holy
You
Spirit's
know what
pretty active.
what I noticed at Catholic U during my time there, and a lot of it has to do with the work of the conventual Franciscan fathers who were there as chaplains, Father Bob Schlageter and his confreres who worked there, the promotion of this very type of experience. We had adoration there regularly. And I will tell you, it was one of the most widely attended activities on the campus. Of course, it was a Catholic university,
Right.
and so people would be more familiar with than they would be at some of these other places you're talking about.
Right.
But it really, I found a deep longing in the young people, and of course, it's been a long time since I was a Catholic youth, but even at that time, a longing for the ability to express faith and share faith and experience faith. And I think it's there. A lot of times it took the form of service. If you had a service project,
Right.
you would almost be guaranteed to get a big turnout of people to
Right.
help out, whether it's to go help the homeless or the poor or Habitat for Humanity or some of these other great non-religious
Right.
events. But what I would say is the thing that's missing was there was no connection between those events and the gospel, or between those events and the call of Jesus to love and serve.
Right.
And so what we tried to do at that place, and in many places do it wasn't unique to Catholic Youth, was to try to draw the connections, to connect the dots, as it were, so people would see, I'm doing this service because it's what the Lord is calling me to do,
Right.
and what the Lord is calling us as his followers to do. So very, very, very important and a beautiful thing. But I don't know really enough
Yeah, I
about
was
it
just
to even comment on
Just
it.
very impressed to see and hear them speak about faith and about Jesus and about just being a community, but praising God and feeling the Holy Spirit, which is very inspiring. And I hope and I pray that it keeps expanding and we see more of it, because our young people, as well as I, they're the church of today.
They're
and,
the church of the present.
That's
You'd say
right.
it's not the future, they're
That's
the
right.
present, and
And we got to get them more involved and bring them in.
and you notice that, some of the parishes that I visit, as I celebrate Mass or participate in whatever reason I'm there, giving sacraments or just giving a talk or something like that, some parishes have tons of young people at them in these events, especially Mass. And it really is so encouraging to me, and the promise of these people. It's beautiful it's a beautiful thing to see. And in some other places you go, you hardly see any young people, and it does make you think, geez, I wonder what the future is going to hold for this parish or this area,
Right.
And to do whatever you can to promote the practice of the faith and the beliefs of our faith, not just doing things, but believing, and believing that leads to becoming part of the church and belonging to the church. I said that at the rite of election. We have every year on the first Sunday of Lent, the catechumens, those who are preparing to be baptized
Right.
at the Easter Vigil, who have been part of the RCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults. I said to them this year, becoming a Catholic is not the hard part.
Right.
It's being a Catholic.
Right.
That's the challenge that people have, and staying with it and practicing and living your faith. Very, very important.
Yeah.
So,
Let's talk about, if we can, the Latin Mass. And,
Dominus vobiscum.
Ectum Spirituum. What's going on, Bishop? Because there's a lot of discussion, a lot of people are concerned, upset.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What's happening?
I would say maybe more I'm going to say globally, but wider than just the Diocese of Trenton. Within the Diocese of Trenton, we have basically 5 parishes that I designated for the celebration of what's now called TLM, Traditional Latin Mass.
Yeah.
It goes by many different names. The Roman Missal of 1962, the Usus Antiquior, the older use. It has many different ways in which it is identified or known.
And this was the Mass we grew up with
It was
up to a certain point,
Missal.
right?
Yeah, it was 1962. Some people refer to it as the Tridentine Mass, referring to the Council of Trent. But the Missal that people are talking about right now is the 1962 Missal, Roman Missal, Missale Romanum. Well, let me just step back a bit. You know, that liturgy or that Mass was as you say, was the form of the Mass. It was the only form of the Mass for us in the Latin Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, for centuries.
Yeah.
This missal was revived and revised and updated in 1962. Pope Pius XII began a series of revisions, liturgical revisions. I think the first thing that he and his helpers, his collaborators, worked on was the revision of the Holy Week ceremonies. I think that.
So this was before the council.
Oh, this was before the council. Yeah, this was in the late 50s. Pope Pius XII. I think that was the first kind of liturgical renovation in a long time. Then the Vatican Council started in 1962. But before the Vatican Council started, the Roman Missal had been revised and edited and published. And that's why I refer to it as the 1962 Missal or the John the 23rd Missal. Sometimes it's called. It's called by different things. And so that was the Missal that was used, and it was used throughout the Second Vatican Council. But at the Second Vatican Council from 1962 to 1965, one of the major concerns of the Council was the revision of the liturgy, the reformation of the liturgy. And by reformation or reform of the liturgy doesn't mean it was bad. It just means it was changed, to change it. And one of the changes was the permission granted to celebrate the Mass in the vernacular, in the language of the people. Up till that time, the Mass was in Latin. And so wherever you would go in the world, it was the same Mass.
Right, exactly.
The same language, same prayers. And so you could be in Africa or in China or wherever, and it would be the same Mass.
My father always said that when he was in the war, in the Navy. He said no matter where I went in the world, it was the same Mass.
It was Mass, yeah, it was the same Mass, and beautiful Mass. And in fact, just a little aside here, I'm great on these asides. I get myself, when I was a teacher, I got myself so distracted sometimes I forgot what I was talking about.
I understand, yeah.
But when I was in China in the mid-'90s, I remember going to what was the cathedral in Beijing for Mass. And it was a Mass offered by what was called at that time the Patriotic Church. So it was the Chinese-controlled Catholic religious service. And it was the 1962 Missal. It was the old Mass that was being celebrated. And I remember I wasn't allowed to wear a Roman collar, even though I was a priest at the time, and I was the dean of St. John's University. I was there on an official business trip. I remember kneeling there in the cathedral in Beijing and looking over, and there was an old priest sitting in the confessional. The confessionals were open. They weren't closed like they are here. And this priest was sitting there, and he was watching me. Of course, I'm American, so I stood out in the crowd.
Right.
And he called me, motioned me to come over. So after Mass was over, I went over and knelt down, and I said to him in Latin, "Ego sum sacerdos." I am a priest. And he just nodded his head, and he reached in his cassock, he had a black cassock on, and he took out a picture of Pope John Paul II, and he kissed it. He wanted to let me know that he was not a patriotic church member, but that he was a faithful Roman Catholic.
Right.
But anyway, the Mass was changed at the Second Vatican Council with the liturgical renewal. The Mass was brought into the English. And it's interesting, the council didn't say it had to be in the vernacular. It gave permission for it to be in the vernacular. Didn't do away with Latin, but of course everybody went in that direction and promoted the Mass in their own language. What is called and referred to sometimes today as the Novus Ordo, the new order of Mass. This is the 1970 Missal. Okay, 1962 Missale Romana was the traditional Latin Mass that you're talking about here when I mentioned the concerns that are being voiced. Then 1970, the new Missal came. I remember I was a seminarian at the time, and it was during the season of Advent when the first English translations were implemented. And it was quite a change, having, served as an altar boy and lived under the Latin Mass. The changes were remarkable, and we were all very excited. And of course, the music changed and all of that. I always had a soft spot in my heart, however, for Gregorian chant. And of course, I was a good student of Latin, so the language wasn't a big issue for me.
Right.
But the Novus Ordo was introduced and became practiced widespread throughout the world, and certainly here in the U.S. And yet, there even in the years since 1970. The Missal again was adapted and re-edited in, I think, 1978, and more recently, I think, in 2011. Even after I became the bishop, there were some changes made to the Missal.
Right.
But there was always a group of Catholics who preferred the older Mass, the Usus Antiquior, the TLM, the traditional Latin Mass, which Pope Benedict referred to as the extraordinary form of the Mass. Sometimes you hear that expression. And, the renewal and the revision of the liturgy really was a source of tension. It was not everybody welcoming it. There was a source of tension, and there were groups within the church that resisted the new rite, the new Novus Ordo, 1970 Missal.
But you say they didn't say you couldn't say the Latin Mass?
They didn't say you couldn't say Mass in Latin.
Okay.
Different.
So that's what you're saying.
It's not just the issue, for some people, it's not the issue of just having the Mass in Latin, because you can always say the Mass in Latin. I still say the Mass, the new rite in Latin.
Well, like an EWTN does that. They'll do that.
And
with
some
Latin.
of our parishes do as well. It's the ritual that is the 1962 ritual.
Right.
That's the issue. And so some groups refused to change and refused to adapt and so on, and kind of broke away from the mainstream Roman Catholic Church. And so Pope Benedict, this was always a concern for Pope Benedict, both when he was Cardinal Ratzinger and also later as Pope, that he wanted to reach out and to try to draw them together. So to draw them back or bring them back to the fold, so to speak. And so in, I think it was 2007, he issued a motu proprio, a letter, apostolic letter, called Summorum Pontificum, in which he extended kind of an olive branch to these groups and said, well, you can use the old form of the Mass, the traditional Latin Mass. That's the ritual, not just Latin, but the ritual in Latin. You can continue to use it under these circumstances, and he spelled them out. Okay, so that had been the practice from 2007 on.
But prior to that, I guess, like under John Paul's pontificate, that was not permitted to do the old rite?
No, it was permitted, but there was no real legislation about it. This motu proprio of the Pope was to try to give it some more organization. Okay. And so rather than have just people going off half-cocked and doing whatever they wanted, Pope Benedict said, well, it's okay to do it. Here are the circumstances that should be followed in order for this Mass to be used. The Mass was always legitimate. I mean, it was not, it wasn't invalid Mass, but it was illicit. It was not to be used. It was supposed to be the
new rite.
And there's a lot here that I'm not referring to or speaking about, simply because we don't have the time. And there's a lot of history here. But anyway, Pope Benedict tried to reach out and draw these people back to the fold and say, well, Here are the circumstances. Celebrate the Mass, celebrate it beautifully, celebrate it well, celebrate it in these contexts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way that it had been going.
Mm-hmm.
Here in our diocese, a number of parishes continued to celebrate the Latin Mass, along with the Novus Ordo, the 1970, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
editions
Right.
of the Mass. And some people preferred to go to the traditional Latin Mass,
Mm-hmm.
and some people didn't. When I came in 2010, there was already a lot of interest in it in a number of places.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to remember that the younger priests, they weren't taught Latin the way that
Right.
we were,
Right.
and so for them, Latin was not that was an issue that was an obstacle more than anything else. I mean,
Right.
just knowing how to pronounce some of the words,
Right.
as well as the fact that they hadn't grown up with this Mass.
Mm-hmm.
But others held on to the tradition. In our diocese, I named a priest, Father Brian Woodrow, as the liaison for the traditional Latin Mass in the diocese, and I asked him to help me to coordinate it so that I knew where the Mass was being said and who was saying it, and that they were able to do it and do it properly, and so on and so forth. And he was very helpful to me.
Yeah.
So we had basically 5 parishes where it was being offered. One, St. John the Baptist in Allentown, New Jersey. Number 2, Holy Cross in Rumson. Number 3, St. Catherine Labouré in Middletown. Then when Father Woodrow was transferred from St. John the Baptist to St. Dominic's in Brick,
Right.
at St. Dominic's started to have it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Holy Innocents in Neptune has it. They only have it like once a month,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the traditional Latin Mass.
Yeah.
So the Mass was celebrated in the church, and the churches were suitable for the Mass and beautifully done.
Mm-hmm.
In some of the parishes, you had hundreds of people going to it.
Mm-hmm.
In some of the parishes, maybe 30, 40, 50, not that many. So I just wanted to make sure that I was aware of it, and if anybody asked me, that I could comment on it.
Mm-hmm.
So then,
That's part of the condition Pope Benedict put on it, that the bishop has to be aware.
No,
Is that-
actually,
Okay.
Pope Benedict said that the bishop didn't have to approve it.
Oh, okay.
If my recollection serves me well, that
he
it
approved
was
it.
allowed
Yeah.
to be celebrated,
Okay.
and that the bishop. My memory's failing me
I think
here,
you're
but
right. I think I remember him saying that. You're right. That it did not require
It
your
didn't
permission.
require the
Yeah.
bishop to authorize it.
Yeah.
Now, some bishops decided that it did,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
and they put a restriction on
Yeah.
themselves. I didn't have that. Of course, I wasn't bishop in 2007. but
Right.
in 2010. So I was happy to have it, happy that the people felt that their spiritual life was, that they received the nourishment and inspiration. I mean, it's the Word of God, and it was the body and blood of Christ. I mean, those are the essential elements of the Mass,
Right.
And
Right.
so that went along pretty well until 2019. And I remember waking up in the morning. I was down at Point Pleasant at the time, and I looked at my cell phone, and there were tons of texts I was getting. I thought, "Oh my God, what's going on?"
Yeah.
And so I called one of the priests. I said, "What's up?" He said, "Well, the Pope won't allow us to say the Latin Mass." I said, wait a minute. So I went and got the document. And Pope Francis had issued a motu proprio, again, just
Right.
like Pope Benedict's motu proprio, was a letter on his own initiative, apostolic letter, in which he restricted the celebration of Latin Mass a bit. And so one of the provisions there was that the Mass should not be celebrated in the parish church. Another provision was that the readings had to be in English or in the vernacular language.
Right.
Another provision was it wasn't supposed to be announced in the bulletins or published when the Mass was, I didn't understand some of the restrictions, but
Hmm.
those are from the Pope, and the Pope is the legislator, supreme
So
legislator.
not in the parish church. What does that mean though?
That meant it could be somewhere else,
In a
parish hall,
okay, but not in the church.
but not in the church.
That was
So
2019.
that was 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the summer, July 16th. I remember
Mhm.
the day. So I gathered the 5 priests or so that celebrated. I asked them to come to my house, and we talked about it. And I said, well, I'm going to dispense from that
Okay.
so that you can say it in the parish church.
Okay.
Because the bishop has dispensing power from universal law.
Okay.
And that, as a canon lawyer, that was in my head.
Sure.
So I thought, well, I'll dispense. And, you can't dispense from what's called constitutive law. That, you can't say, well, I'm going to use a rice cake rather than bread for the Eucharist.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't.
Right.
That constitutes a sacrament.
Hmm.
You can't dispense from penal law, penalties that the law establishes for certain actions.
Hmm.
If you deny your faith,
Right.
excommunication or something like that. And procedural law, the church sets up certain procedures that have to be followed, and the bishop can't dispense from those. But you can dispense from other things.
Mhm.
So this motu proprio, traditionis custodes, didn't seem to fit into any of those categories.
Okay.
So many of us as bishops, we dispensed.
Right.
And to me, it didn't make sense not to have this mass in a church because the church is suited for it. It's
Right.
beautiful, it's
Right.
noble, it's worthy,
Right.
rather than in a hotel room or a gym or someplace like that. So I gave the dispensation to the priests. And then the Congregation for Doctrine for Discipline of Worship, Divine Worship, which now is called a dicastery for Divine Worship, but the congregation at the time issued a response to some doubts that were raised about Pope Francis, questions that were raised.
Hmm.
And so the Congregation for Worship established a response to the doubts and what could be done and couldn't be done. But it didn't define clearly this dispensing power of the bishop in this matter.
Okay.
So this year, a rescript was issued last month, which clarified, and the rescript came from Cardinal Roach, who is the prefect now of what's called the Dicastery for Divine Worship, with the approval of Pope Francis, that the bishop cannot dispense and allow from this that allows the Mass to be said in the church.
Okay.
That he has to have the approval of the Holy See.
Okay.
So those of us who did dispense then were caught unaware, and we didn't realize this was this was coming. I certainly didn't.
Okay.
And so what I had to do is I told the priest, I said, well, February 26th, it'll be the last Mass in the church. I will ask for the dispensation because I support
Right.
the use of this.
Right.
So I'll ask for the dispensation, but if you can, have the Mass in a worthy place on your campus somewhere, a parish hall or school or something like that, or if you have a chapel, because the thing was you can't have it in the parish church. Well, I'm a strict interpreter of canon law.
Right.
And so I said, well, if it says not the parish church, if I have some other building on the property that's not the parish church, you can have it there.
Okay.
So that's what I asked them to do.
Yeah.
Then I wrote immediately to Cardinal Roach in Rome and asked for a dispensation for those 5 parishes to allow it to be in the church. So I'm waiting to hear from that.
Okay.
But I in visiting, or we almost finished
Yeah. About a minute left, Bishop.
in visiting different parishes. I mean, people are coming up and complaining, and I
Yeah.
just said, wait a minute, this is the Pope. The Pope has authorized this, so we will follow the rule. I'm not going to disobey the Pope. So we'll follow the rule.
Now we're just waiting to hear.
And now we're just waiting to hear.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't need letters and all petitions and all these other things. I've already done what had to be done, and
Right.
that's written and asked for the dispensation.
Great.
So that's one of the things. There's a lot going on today, like you perhaps reading about this argument between the Cardinal in San Diego,
Yes.
and
Yes.
he had a certain take on things, and
Right.
there's so many things that are going on in the church today that seem polarizing.
Yes.
And this fight over the Latin Mass isn't one example, but this other argument between the cardinals and the bishops about certain things, and then the synod and some of the things that are being brought about by the synod. You know, maybe the next time we do the program, I'll talk a little
Let's
bit more
do
about
that.
the synod as we get a little closer to it.
Very
But
good. Thank
thanks.
you, Bishop.
God bless everybody. Stay with it. Don't let Lent pass you by.